everyone. Thank you so much for attending the PAA Memorial Service. It's so nice to be here, to come together in person, to reflect and remember our dearly departed colleagues. And we did this last year online, so it's nice to be together this year to be able to remember and share stories. I'm Jenny Brand. I'm a professor of sociology at UCLA and chaired the Memorial Service Committee, and want to thank Teresa Sullivan and David Swanson for also serving on the committee, and Danielle Stout for doing a wonderful job of organizing as usual. We have 11 people who will reflect and remember tonight. And each speaker will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for others to say a few words, and some will be joining us remotely and some are here. So we'll have a hybrid session here. And we're gonna begin this evening with Sarah McClanahan, who was a past PA president and a professor at Princeton University. And our speaker will be Kathy Eden from Princeton.
My great honor to spend 5 minutes talking about my mentor and friend, Sarah Frances Smith McClanahan. Many of you in this call could do as well as me, Tim, Angus, Ann, and others. As you know, she was born in 1940 in Tyler, Texas. And she always wanted to go out east, and she finally achieved that goal in 1959 when she moved to New York to attend Bennett College, where she graduated with highest honors. She then moved on to Northampton to attend Smith in 1961, but that was interrupted by the marriage to Ellery McClanahan in 1962. So by the 70s, the family was settled in Houston, and in 1972 the couple was divorced. And it is notable that when she finished her undergraduate degree, it was as a single mother, and in the next year it was as a single mother that she enrolled in the University of Texas for her PhD. Now, it's interesting, it might be interesting to know that when Sarah went to graduate school, she did not study single parenthood because she felt that would be inappropriate. She thought she'd be too personally involved. So she actually studied healthcare delivery systems like the HMO, but she took a pivotal course while she was at UT with our own Terry Sullivan, who's on the screen right below me. And it was there that demography and questions of the family, trends in divorce, marriage and remarriage really began to capture her attention. So that was sort of the first inkling of what she would become. She then got a postdoc at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin, but luckily she began to attend the brown bags that the Institute for Research on Poverty held. And of course, it was at one of these brown bags that they began to discuss this new book that had come out, had been actually serialized in the New Yorker, called The Underclass. And the author, Ken Auletta, made a claim that really got under her skin. He said, and I quote, "One cannot talk about poverty in America or about the underclass without talking about the weakened family structure of the poor." Now, Sarah knew studies had been done on this. The data weren't very good. She thought she could do better with better data. And so, more or less, she set out to prove Ken Auletta wrong. Now, in 1986, Augie Sorensen, knowing a good thing when he saw it, decided to hire Sarah as an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology. And 5 years and more than a dozen publications later, and I should say one of the earliest publications concerning the family was actually a qualitative study She received early tenure in 1986 and became a full professor in 1989, achieving all of those milestones as a single mother with lightning speed. So by this time, you know, Ken Auletta and Terry Sullivan had led her down the path to study the one thing she thought she was not going to study, single parenthood as a single parent. So she kept trying to get at this puzzle. Was single parenthood deleterious to child well-being? And no matter what way she went about it, she kept finding that kids of single parents didn't do as well as kids with married parents. And I should point out that she pointed to, and I quote, the low earnings capacity of single mothers, the lack of child support from non-resident parents, and meager public benefits as reasons for these deficits. But nonetheless, her work raised feminine hackles. You probably remember, as I do, the 1986 book with Irv Garfinkel, her research collaborator and husband, Single Mothers and Their Children. I can say that that book, when I read it early in my career, was life-changing. And then in some ways, the sequel 8 years later with Gary Sandiford, Growing Up with a Single Parent, where she and Gary used 4 national data sets to try to look at questions of family structure and child well-being. In 1990, Marvin Bressler, the chair at Princeton, had the good sense to lure her to Princeton, and Irv simultaneously was lured to Columbia. And a couple of years later, the center I now run, the Center for Research on Child Wellbeing, was born. So in 1998, just a few years after that, 8 years into her tenure at Princeton, that center became home to the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Study, a birth cohort of about 5,000 children and their parents interviewed at 1, 3, 5, 9, 15, and 22. Sarah was president of the PAA in 2004 with her riveting, I was in the front row, riveting Diverging Destinies, How Children Are Faring in the Second Demographic Tradition. In 2004, she also started the journal Future of Children. Her research is 2 distinctives. Her research informs policy debates, and it brings the best data and method to bear. Over her career, Sarah published, gulp, 125 articles, 7 books, 59 book chapters, and to date, 915 articles have been published using the Fragile Families data. She was a member of the American Academy, the National Academy, the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences, and the American Philosophical Society. She is truly a trailblazer, and it is an honor to remember her today. Thank you.
Floor to anyone else who'd like to share comments or stories or reflections.
Hi, can everyone hear me? I'm Christine Prochaski. I was one of Sarah's.
Right. There's time now for anyone else to share recollections.
Hi, Kathy. I'm sharing recollection now. Apparently there's some audio glitch. Sarah was my advisor, and you know, what can I say? So I graduated from Princeton in 2008, and she was my model of what an academic and what a generous mentor is. She was always enthusiastic about the research questions her students were pursuing. She encouraged us to pursue questions that mattered and to do it with the highest degree of integrity, with the best data and the best methods, and to be colleagues to one another and to be generous colleagues with everyone. And she was so much more, but I am so grateful for the opportunity to have worked with Sarah and for her mentorship throughout my career. I remember at the PAA we had in Chicago, my little guy was an infant, and I said, oh, I don't know if I'll attend. And she said, well, come and meet with me, bring the baby. And she was just so encouraging. and the ultimate sort of mentor and scholar. And so I am grateful for having her in my life and my mentor and in our discipline, and for showing an example of really, yes, the best of what demography has to offer. So I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Can I just say just a couple of things? My wife, Marcy Carlson, who was mentored by Sarah, can't be here, but Irv and Sarah have been my dear friends since I carried the couch up to their first place at Chamberlain Avenue in 1979 when they moved in together in Madison. They're never hard to find anybody who was nicer, more caring, more giving, and wiser in a really nice way. She never tried to bowl you over with anything. She just was there, and she was supportive, and she'll be terribly missed by Marcy and I. That's enough for now. Kath said a lot. It's a lot more to be said, but there will be, and there is, a new fund in her behalf that's starting. The PAA has approved an award, the Sarah McClanahan Award, and I don't know that much about it other than damn right I'm going to support it. And we'll hear more about it later. So may she rest in peace. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Marta Tienda, and I had the privilege of overlapping with Sarah at graduate school at the University of Wisconsin and at Princeton. I hosted her at my home when she interviewed, and she hosted me at her home when I interviewed at Princeton. I knew her family, and I have to say that as people come, there's no one like her. She was genuine, she was warm, she was always giving. She's at the highest standards, and I had the privilege of being able to visit with her in her last month and know her daughters at a primary level, at a good level. Her creativity and her dogged determination to get behind the numbers and understand is unparalleled, and I will miss her dearly. But she left an indelible imprint that has a very long tail in the multiplication of students and ideas that continue to proliferate, because the studies that she has seeded continue to bear great fruit.
Thank you, Marta. Others? Yeah.
I'll say something really quick. So I'm Rebecca Johnson. I graduated, I guess, 8 years after Christine from Princeton. Sarah was one of my advisors. Yeah, and it's just been remarkable to hear about all her accomplishments, you know, the 100+ articles, because I think for me and many of her other mentees, she was just the most generous advisor one could imagine in graduate school. I remember countless meetings in her office, you know, telling her terrible research ideas that she always listened to generously. I think, as Christine said, she's really a model for what academia, you know, can and should be, which is a supportive, you know, not at all toxic environment. She knew my family members very well. I've gotten to know her granddaughter when she's at Dartmouth, and she just really modeled what it meant to not only be a successful academic and, you know, publish a lot and win all these awards and honors, but to care about people and just be a really kind and generous person. And all of her mentees feel like we owe so much of our careers to her mentorship, and, you know, really miss her and appreciate her. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Anyone else? Or anyone online who's would like to jump in? I'll just say too, every conversation I ever had with Sarah, I was the better for it. She really was just so warm and generous, and I just felt better after being with her. And I miss her dearly too. Okay, we will go to our second Harley Browning, the University of Texas at Austin, and Marta Tienda from Princeton will.
Harley Browning passed away at his home in Boulder, Colorado on June 21st, 2021 at the age of 94. Surviving him are his wife, Waltraud Fink Browning, Baldi, as we knew her, 2 sons, Eric and Tulio. I used to take care of them, 5 grandchildren, and his twin brother, Clyde. Harley was born in Akron, Ohio in 1927. After receiving his BA degree from Kent State in 1949, he began his graduate training at University of California, Berkeley in the early 1950s, earning a PhD under Kingsley Davis in 1962. His dissertation, Urbanization in Mexico, laid the foundation for a long-term research agenda about migration and urban development in Latin America. At Berkeley, Harley met his future wife, Valdi, who also became a lifelong friend to many dozens of colleagues and graduate students and their spouses. In 1960, Jack Gibbs and Leonard Broom founded the Population Research Center as a unit within the Soc Department at the University of Texas at Austin. After joining the sociology faculty in 1962, Harley became the director from the mid-1960s to 1977. Over 30 plus years until his retirement from UT in 1993, Harley forged institutional and training legacies through his leadership of the PRC, through his skillful recruitment and his training of several generations of demographers, and through his role recruiting and mentoring assistant professors. NICHD announced the start of its Population Centers Grants program in 1970. Under Harley's direction, the UT Population Research Center was the first social science population center to receive core support from NICHD. Other universities soon followed. The Texas PRC remains today as one of the leading centers for demographic research in the world, especially for research on Latin America and migration. During his tenure at UT, Harley inspired a generation of Latin American demographers to research on internal migration, urbanization, and the structural transformation of employment. In the late 1960s, with 2 students, Jorge Balan and Elizabeth Helene, and with the assistance of Valdi Browning, Harley pioneered the life history approach to internal migration. Their groundbreaking study, Men in a Developing Society at UT Press, 1973, is still recognized today as a classic in the migration literature. It set the direction for a considerable body of work on internal and international movement by contextualizing migration decision-making against social and family circumstances. Equally insightful, if less well-known, were Harley's ideas about the social significance of generational length and its implications for the life course. He was among the first demographers to document how changes in life expectancy could influence both the timing and sequencing of major life events, such as completion of education, first marriage, and first birth that defined the transition to adulthood. During the latter years of his career, Harley was in the vanguard in recognizing the broad social implications of the structural transformation of the labor force by signaling the importance of understanding economic development through the size and composition of tertiary employment. With his student Joachim Singelman, Harley developed a new industry classification scheme that considered the differentiation of services and identified their functions and differential growth rates in the course of economic development. Through decades of working with students, colleagues, and a broad network of collaborators, Harley was a central figure building the field of Latin American demography. His students hailed from Argentina, Brazil, Guatemala, Chile, Colombia, Honduras, Mexico, Peru, and the United States. Today, many of the best-known demographers of Latin America were either Harley's students or collaborators, and most were affiliates of or visitors to the Population Research Center. Harley was the quintessential mentor. In the 1970s, the active faculty of Texas PRC consisted of Harley and a handful of young assistant professors. Harley mentored junior faculty before the practice was formally instituted. He regularly met with junior faculty, routinely provided probing comments on manuscripts, reviewed course syllabi, and even attended undergraduate classes to offer objective feedback on teaching. That so many young faculty's careers flourished is a tribute to his dedicated mentorship. For graduate students, Harley humanized the arduous training process with cooked dinners at the Waldheim, the Browning's beautiful home on Pico Street, prior to extended discussion of manuscripts, theses, or dissertation chapters. He never missed a deadline for a letter of recommendation and generously shared books from his personal library. A true Renaissance man, Harley also shared with his students and friends his cultural interests beyond demography and sociology, especially music and jazz in particular, and art and literature on a wide range of topics. Harley's students and colleagues will forever honor him for superb mentorship that was customized to those of us fortunate to have benefited from his professional guidance and friendship. Harley Browning redefined academic selflessness and humility. He cultivated trust, admiration, and gratitude among his students and colleagues. Collectively and individually, we stand in his debt and we mourn his passing. This was jointly authored with Dudley Poston and Joachim Singelman.
Thank you, Marta. I will open it up for other comments.
Yeah, Jenny, could I say a few words, please?
Yes.
Yes, I'm one of those assistant professors. I'm now 81 years old, but I'm one of those assistant professors Marta referred to back in the early 1970s when it was Harley who ran the whole demography program, and there were 3 or 4 assistant professors. But Harley, this was before there was mentoring, officially mentoring, and Harley would come to my classes. He'd read my syllabi, he'd read my articles. And if you had a hard time getting published at first, which I did, Harley would always console me and take me out and buy me a beer on the way home so that I wouldn't be so upset. And I think what Marta didn't mention is another point. I see Valdi Browning is here on the screen. Valdi was also a tremendous help to young people in those days, bringing the family together for play dates, and the young children. Tullio's on the screen there. He was just a young boy then. So really, Harley and Valdi, they just don't make people like them anymore. And I want to thank Harley and Valdi for all their wonderful contributions. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Others?
This is George Huff. I just have a question for Valdi. Valdi, do you still have a closet full of Kahlua?
Yes, I think that's true.
Yeah. So I don't get enough of it.
In trouble now.
Every Christmas, Valdi would try to use up as much as she could of the Kahlua by making treats out of the Kahlua. And we all appreciated the parties that they held at their houses and the welcoming meals and everything else. So I want to thank you, because I was a graduate student during that time, but never took a course from Harley directly. So
we will move to Lincoln Day, who's at Australian National University, and our speaker is Terry Hall, also from Australian National University.
Day was my PhD supervisor, one of 12 over the years, the one who spent most time talking about everything other than my PhD, which is what he was engaged in was everything in life. And he was a remarkable person. Born in Ames, Iowa, and he died 11th of December, 2021, after a period of time with dementia. Alice Day, his wife of 69 years, was with him when he died. And she was saying, in the way that people do, it was a blessing. I think the real blessing was his life. He was educated as a scholarship student at Yale University. His mother was a school teacher. He was an excellent student. He did his MA and PhD at Columbia University. In 1949, if you can look it up in ResearchGate and all of those places, he wrote about the patterns of outmigration of Italian Americans. I was surprised to find out about that. But then 1951, fairly young still, he wrote about patterns of marriage in Puerto Rico. He taught at Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, and then became chief of the demographic statistics branch at the UN Statistical Division. Lincoln and Alice were at the cutting edge of the fertility control issue in the early 1960s. He wrote an essay about the American fertility cult, which morphed into their 1964 book, Too Many Americans. That was possibly not the best choice of title for publishing in America. Lincoln Alice went on to have very close relations with people across America in setting up ZPG and other organizations for reducing fertility. They visited the ANU and liked Australia, and in 1973 took up a continuing appointment or a tenured position, which Link held for 21 years. He loved the bush in Australia, and they would always be out, going out, roaming around the bush. He also loved the tea room culture. The ANU was famous for having the big tea room where everybody met. Every young graduate students would sit with former prime ministers and talk about the issues of the day. Link was introducing everyone to everyone else. After retirement in 1994, we used to have compulsory retirement at 65. He moved to Washington with Alice, but they regularly returned to Australia to visit friends. And in the early 2000s, they started a second career at age 75, creating documentaries about the impact of war on the environment. It was called Scarred Lands and Wounded Lives. It's well worth searching on YouTube to see the many little short films that they made in that series. My son used to call Link dapper. You get some sense of it here. You also got a sense of it on the buses of Canberra because Link would never drive anywhere. He was the most dapper person on the bus. And he was also a gentleman and a very gentle man. Yes, he was a warrior for the environment and for a committed egalitarian. And that's what we miss in this day and age. And I'm just sorry that my students never had a chance to work with Lincoln Day.
Thank you, Terry. Other comments?
I would like to make a comment. This is John Casterline. Lincoln Day was my first teacher in demography. I, quite by accident, took an undergraduate semester course in demography from Link, and that's what got me interested in this field. A few years after that, he directed my senior thesis, then hired me for a year at the UN, and when I was considering graduate programs, he advised me very wisely. And over the years, Link and Alice kept up with me much better than I kept up with them, but they were really the most loyal of friends in that respect, and always gracious hosts. And time with them always covered everything. So I can't add very much to what you've already heard. Just say he was a wonderful teacher for me, and as an instance of a teacher who was life-changing. I wouldn't be doing this field if it hadn't been for Lincoln Day.
Thank you, John. G. Edward Ebanks from the University of Western Ontario. And our speaker is Lisa Stroschein, University of Alberta. Thank you.
So I'm here today to talk about the life of G. Edward Ebanks. We all knew him as Eddie. I want to welcome the family and friends who are here participating today. I'm speaking as in an official capacity as the president of the Canadian Population Society, but I'm also speaking as someone who enjoyed the company of Eddie and who had and has very cherished memories now of spending time in the backyard with him and his wife, Heather, listening to the finches and the robins and the things growing in the garden and having really lively conversations, because Eddie was a person who loved life, who loved to laugh and had a deep intellectual curiosity. And so we had very engaging conversations in their backyard. So Eddie died on Monday, November the 8th in 2021, after a brief battle with cancer. Eddie grew up in a small rural community on the south coast of Jamaica. He excelled in school, winning scholarships to study mathematics at the University of the West Indies. For postgraduate studies, Eddie went to Cornell University on a full scholarship from the Population Council. By 1968, he had completed his MA and PhD in sociology, specializing in demography. Eddie joined the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, Canada, in 1968 as an assistant professor in the newly established Department of Sociology, specializing in population studies. His strong background in statistics and quantitative methods and demography was valuable in developing a population studies program at the university. He quickly rose through the ranks, finally serving as chair of the department for 5 years. During his term as chair, he recruited a number of young, talented faculty and was a champion for graduate students. At the wider university level, he was 3 times president of the Faculty Association, served as a member of the University Senate, and a member of the Board of Governors. He retired in 2003, having spent his entire career at Western University. Eddie's research on fertility, migration, and urbanization spanned Canada, the Caribbean, and Latin America. He authored several research monographs, and his work appeared in journals such as Demography, Sex Roles, Population Studies, and Studies in Family Planning. In these works, Eddie revealed a careful attention to rigor and practical relevance. His sabbaticals took him to the UN demographic centers in San Jose, Costa Rica, Santiago, Chile, and to the World Fertility Survey offices in London, England. He conducted extensive field work in Barbados and was a sought-out consultant for a wide number of agencies, including the Population Council, CETA, IDRC, and the International Statistical Institute. Eddie helped to found the Canadian Population Society in 1974. He served on the Council of CPS for many years and finally served as its president from 1998 to 2000. Over the course of his 35-year career, Eddie attended every annual conference of the Canadian Population Society. He was also active in the PAA, and he served a term for the IUSSP, being elected to that position in 1972. Eddie took great pride in the achievement of his students. He supervised a large number of master's and PhD students and took great interest in their achievements after they left Western. Many of his students went on to become tenured professors or to work in governmental institutions such as Statistics Canada, the World Health Organization, and CETA. Indeed, I received an email from a dean at a university nearby recalling the strong mentorship that she had received from Eddie and wanted to be able to express that at the meeting today, that he had made such a profound influence on her life. Beyond that, Eddie was an avid sports enthusiast. He made regular time to join friends in a game of golf or a tennis match. Joining a running group in his early days at Western, he continued to run most lunch hours of his career, forming enduring friendships with his running mates. Eddie had an adventurous spirit and a deep intellectual curiosity. His greatest joy was his family and his numerous close friends. He delighted in family and the many friends that he made in his field of expertise, colleagues across the university, fellow champions of causes, neighbors, and most recently, his caregivers. Each felt the warmth of his huge heart and his generous personality. He will be missed.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Anyone would like to make additional comments? We will go to Jason Finkel, who was at the University of Michigan, and speaking on his behalf is Barbara Crane.
Good evening, everyone. Jason Finkel was a political scientist who had an important impact on the understanding of population policies and the political and ideological influences that shape them. I am also a political scientist who frequently co-authored with Jason. When we went together to a PAA meeting in 1975, Paul Demain was launching the Population and Development Review and invited us to write a piece for the first issue on the politics of the 1974 World Population Conference in Bucharest, an article which for decades afterward was widely cited and found on graduate student reading lists. Jason was a mentor not only to me, but to many other leaders and scholars in fields of population, global health, and reproductive rights. A recent virtual memorial with 30 close family members and professional friends included current or retired leaders from USAID, Population Research, Policy and Services Divisions, the State Department, the CDC, Save the Children, JSI, and IPAS. Among those gathered also was Joe Shami, a former research assistant of Jason's who became head of the United Nations Population Division, and Jason's daughter, Clea, a political scientist who had a long career in family planning with the Gates Foundation. Jason grew up in Chelsea, Massachusetts. In 1944, just 17 years old, he enlisted in the Army and participated in the opening of the gates of Wöbbelin, a German concentration camp. He returned from the war to study on the GI Bill and earn an MA and PhD in political science at the University of Michigan, after which he went on to teach at the University of Florida. Leaving academia in 1959, he joined the Michigan State Advisory Group in Vietnam for 2 years, a US government initiative. He observed the corruption in the Diem regime and became an opponent of the war. He returned to teach at the University of California, Davis, where he collaborated with Richard Gable in editing an influential volume entitled Political Development and Social Change, first published in 1966 and reissued in a second edition in 1969. But a major turning point was ahead for him as he made a decision in 1965 to go to India with the Ford Foundation, recruited by Moy Fryman, as India was gearing up its national family planning program. Jason returned from India in 1967 to join the newly created Interdisciplinary Center for Population Planning at the University of Michigan. He was one of the first to write on the comparative politics of population policy, with a seminal article published in 1971 comparing the family planning programs of India and Pakistan. His attention then turned in the early 1970s to the politics of the United Nations system's response to rapid population growth, the global issue of the day. Over the next 25 years, he embarked on a series of studies that ultimately covered analyses of the major world population conferences in 1974, 1984, and 1994, as well as in-depth investigations of the World Health Organization, the World Bank, and the United Nations Population Fund. He also co-edited an important volume with Alison McIntosh, The New Politics of Population, Conflict and Consensus in Family Planning, published in 1994. Earlier in 1984, Jason initiated the Michigan International Population Fellows Program funded by USAID, directing it until 1991 and launching dozens of American university graduates in careers in global population health and development, many of whom have themselves made great impacts and left a lasting legacy. Beyond his scholarly work and teaching, Jason loved his family, his wife of more than 60 years, Patricia, his 4 daughters and 8 grandchildren. He will be greatly missed by all who loved him and appreciated his mordant sense of humor. The Michigan football and basketball teams have also lost one of their most passionate fans. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Now we'll open it up to additional comments.
I am John Wilmeth. I'm currently at the UN Population Division. I met Jason when I was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Michigan in 1980. I took his course, his graduate course, read the articles he had written with Barbara Crane and others. And, you know, I was very much a technical demographer trained in statistics, and he really inspired my interest in the politics of demography and the politics around the question of global population growth. And I think led me to a research project that I did in the early 90s, really the late 80s and early 90s, on how population growth was represented in the popular media. That was really thanks to Jason's inspiration that I got into that. And it has served me well, in particular in my current position as head of the Pop Division. So I really appreciate that what he gave me. It was important influence in my life.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Van Landingham. There are many qualities of Jason that I admired: his intelligence, his compassion, his ability to write as beautifully as he did. I think what I admired about him the most was his ability to really push students, myself and my classmates, to think more deeply about a lot of our assumptions. It made us feel uncomfortable, but did it in a way where he would often have that expression that he's got in this photograph, where you knew where he was coming from, you know, and trying to push you a little bit further to think a bit more deeply about, you know, very complicated issues. And I always felt like my work was better after my conversation with him.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we will go to Richard Leichman, who is at Portland State University, and our speaker is Alan De La Torre, who's at Portland State University.
We're going to start out. This is George Huff. We're going to start out with me, and then Alan is going to join after I'm done with my comments. I don't have a whole history of Dick Leichen, as everybody is sort of talking about. I will say this: he grew up with Midwest roots, being born in Wisconsin, and obtained his PhD in 1964 in geography from the University of Washington after serving in the Navy. I first met Dick in 1994 when I interviewed and was hired as a state data center coordinator for the Portland State University Population Research Center. After spending a number of years with Dick with regard to stuff, and let me go back and say, Dick, I believe, was hired at Portland State in 1964, and he died in December of this year, still working. So that would make 58 years at Portland State University. He worked 23 years after his retirement, still coming in almost daily to do research with regard to stuff. So that'll tell you the commitment that Dick had to research. Dick became my poster child as a lifelong learner. There wasn't anything that Dick wasn't willing to learn. For example, he was one of the first people I'd ever seen use ArcInfo on some old Sun workstations with regard to stuff, and made his way all the way through all the Esri and ArcView. While he was doing this, he was teaching students as he was learning it simultaneously, which was very impressive. Dick was also somebody who was at the forefront with regards to adapting technology. He was, as we would say, an early adapter with regards to things. One of his earliest things was he loved GPS. So he was one of the first people, being a geographer, he got the GPS system. And he gave us a story one time, and we're not sure whether it's true or whether it was a joke, that he had placed the GPS inside his wife Elaine's minivan. And Dick said that he now had a function where he could determine how much money Elaine had spent on a shopping trip based upon, one, the number of sites she visited or stores, and also the length of time that she spent in each of the stores. And once again, we weren't sure whether this is a true story or a joke that he was playing on us. So Dick then sort of developed sort of skills in Visual Basic, integrating them with Excel. At the time, our bread and butter, for the most part, our monies that came in from externally at the Population Research Center were for school enrollment forecasts. Well, we had done these school enrollment forecasts in a very ad hoc sort of manner. And Dick came along and he sort of integrated Visual Basic with Excel. And the next thing we knew, we had this spreadsheet that had model schedules for fertility, mortality, and migration, which we could use to fit the school enrollment forecast and then sort of project into the future much better than we previously had been able to do. So we greatly appreciated that. One of Dick's greatest accomplishments was in 1985 with his co-authors in geography, Dan Johnson and Richard Peterson, had developed this Atlas of Oregon Lakes. Now, secretly, I believe Dick went on this research project, and they published this book in 1985 because they wanted to know the best fishing holes in Oregon with regards to stuff. They took that in the 1985 book, which was very static. It was a beautiful sort of book. It's nice for a coffee table, but it was not very dynamic. So Dick got some seed money with the other two colleagues, and they sort of have put together this thing that incorporates Google Earth as well as ArcGIS, and it can get down and tell you bathymetry with regards to the depth of lakes and what their features look like underneath, as well as can tell you where the best fishing holes are, because it also gives a list of the fish that are stocked in each of them. So if you're interested, go to OregonLakesAtlas.org and you can look that up, and good luck fishing there. Next, I want to talk about Dick's transition from being a geographer to being an applied demographer. Given Dick's Midwest humility, and he was a very humble man, Dick always thought he had imposter syndrome when it came to being an applied demographer, as he had never had any formal training. And Dick would never take credit for things that he didn't know, that kind of thing. And so he started to come to the applied demography meetings, and he got a couple publications out of that. And he also received some of the best feedback he ever had with regards to this, and very much appreciated meeting the applied demographers. Although once again, we would go out to dinner and he said, you would always ask, "Are you sure I'm invited?" And I said, "Yes, Dick, you are most certainly invited. There are many people out there who have much less skills who claim to be applied demographers." And lastly, I would like to talk about Dick as a mentor. When I was the director of the Population Research Center, Dick mentored me a number of times, and mostly he saved me from myself when it came to dealing with the administration of the university, whether it be the college or whether it happened to be the sort of the school we were located in. So Alan, you're up.
Thank you, George. I'm looking at Dick's jacket, and I remember so many times seeing that on the hook at the end of the corridor where we both worked for many years. I first learned of Dr. Lykken in 2009 when I was a doctoral student in urban studies at Portland State. He was interested in learning what I knew about why older people were moving out of Portland. Honestly, I don't know if I ever taught him anything novel about migration, but over the years, I certainly learned a lot from him. Since about 2018, he poured his time and energy into a project I was leading called the State of Aging in Portland. He was never paid. In fact, he always passed when I asked if he was interested in being written into research proposals, and sometimes joked that he'd be dead before we finished the project. That was not the case with the State of Aging in Portland. He saw it across the finish line. He always worked tirelessly, whether it was reviewing literature, learning new things, crunching data, or framing the results so it could be taken up by policymakers and practitioners. So it wasn't just an academic exercise. In the foreword to the report, one of our co-authors, Dr. Margaret Neal, who's on this call as well, offered the following. We said to Dr. Lycan, your curiosity, vision, and steady work has created novel and interesting ways to understand the social demography of aging. You've laid a path for future research, policy, and practice. He wanted the study to be called the Atlas of Old, which is interesting when you compare it with the Atlas of Lakes. Now that I work in government, I really think about the study in that way. I see it as an atlas I can refer to for trends, for methodological approaches, and for insights when planning for the future of Portland, Oregon. Dick was a mentor, and he became a friend over the last several years we worked together, and he left an indelible mark on me personally. He embodied the spirit of generativity, and I'll carry his insights and advice with me indefinitely, and I'll be forever indebted to his leadership and mentorship.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. I've knew Dick for over 35 years, since I was a student at Portland State in the 1980s. And I'll make one correction to what George said. He wasn't at PSU in 1964. He worked several years at University of Victoria, BC, prior to coming to PSU. And therefore he taught geography of Canada, among many other things. But what I want to say about Dick is just amazing, wonderful how he kept doing what he loved right up until the day he died. And that included coming to PSU to work and contributing, as Alan mentioned. It included his 1,000-mile road trips. One time he drove from Portland to Edmonton, Canada to see his grandson play hockey. And then the next week he came back to Portland and drove to San Diego to see the rest of his family. And that was when he was close to 80 years old. The other thing he loved was being out in Oregon's and nationally, river rafting and being out on the water. He would go on the Road Scholar trips that took people out on rapids, and he was doing that up until his 80s. So he did what he loved right up until the day he died.
Yeah, this is George again, and I'd like to add back on to Charles. I have this scenario in my head when Dick gets to the pearly gates and God offers him a set of wings. Dick says, "No, how about some keys to a truck, and I'll just go explore it on my own." With regard to it, as Charles said, there were days he would either go fishing, he'd just strap his canoe to the top of his truck and drive off somewhere to go fishing with his buddy Ken Duker, or he would just drive to John Day in Central Oregon for the heck of it and drive on back. And like Charles said, we used to wonder every single winter at Christmas time, he would go to join his family in San Diego, and he would say he was driving, and Elaine would say, "I'm getting on a plane." And we'd say, "Dick, you can't go down to San Diego, it's winter." And he said, "Well, I'm not going over Shasta. I'm going to go inland and then go back behind sort of the Cascade Mountains and then make my way back in and then down to San Diego," which probably added 200 plus miles onto his trip. So that was Dick. And he was always, as Charles said, a very sharing individual with regards to his knowledge and helping you be better at what it is that you did.
Thank you.
Margaret, Lisa, anybody else got any comments? Irina?
Okay, we will go to Marianne McDormand, who's at the University of Maryland, and our speaker is Michael Rendell, also from University of Maryland.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for moderation on this. Marianne died in office very much. She passed away just 12 days ago. She had terminal illness. She was in hospice when she passed away. You probably know her better for her work than her as a person whose work has stood for itself, especially well, many of you may know her recent research starting in 2016 involved a series of articles on trends and disparities in maternal deaths that provided the evidentiary basis that helped ignite the current national effort to reduce maternal mortality and disparities in maternal mortality. In part, this was Marion. She's been a renowned researcher in the field of maternal and child health. She passed away, as I said, just 12 days ago on March 26th at the age of only 63. At the time, she was a research professor at the Maryland Population Research Center. Because unfortunately she had a terminal illness, I asked her colleagues if they could write an obituary for her, and I'm extracting from that, and you can consult our MPRC website to see it. Her colleagues were Marie Tomo, was I'll say the first author on the obituary, and she consulted also Stephanie Ventura and Jean Leclerc, who she worked with for many years, especially in the NCHS. So Marion, in fact, prior to her appointment with the MPRC, she was a senior social scientist at the National Center for Health Statistics, Center for Disease Control, and that was for 25 years. Her research at NCHS identified and explored persistent racial and ethnic disparities and international variations in infant mortality. And recognizing that, from 2013 until 2019, she served as editor of Birth Issues in Perinatal Care. And I'm just going to skip to say that the journal Birth Issues in Perinatal Care has created the Marion McDormand Award for Research Excellence. You can find the link again on our website, to honor her contributions to the field. This fellowship or prize will be awarded annually to the first author of a manuscript accepted for publication in Birth that uses population data to advance access to high quality perinatal care across settings and populations that are historically underrepresented in research. Marion's robust research program of over 100 publications has contributed significantly to our understanding of maternal and infant mortality, birth settings, and the effect of medical interventions on the birthing process. In 2006, her research on low-risk cesarean delivery and infant mortality was recognized by Discover magazine as an outstanding study in science. Recognized as a leading scientist in the field, Marion recently served on the National Academy of Sciences expert panel on assessment of birth settings, and she has received numerous awards for her innovations and applications to the field, including the National Maternal and Child Health Epidemiology Award for Effective Practice, and NCHS's Elijah White Outstanding Scientist Award. She was tireless in her efforts to develop an evidentiary basis for advocacy to ensure the well-being of mothers, birthing people, and their infants. She was also an extraordinary mentor to many, helping to ensure high-quality research capability in the years ahead. And her impact will remain for many generations to come. And I would just say that as her colleague at Maryland Population Research Center, it was very much a life cut far too short in the prime of her scholarly career.
Anyone else would like to speak about Marion? Okay, we will move to Robert Cheney, who was at the University of Michigan, and Vicki Friedman from University of Michigan will speak about Robert.
Thank you. I'm honored to speak about my colleague and friend, Bob Shaney, who passed away on October 13th, 2021, from complications from ALS. He was 57. Bob was a research professor at the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research, and he also held appointments at the Department of Economics and the Ford School of Public Policy. Bob was trained at the University of Michigan in the Department of Economics. He spent the first decade of his career at the RAND Corporation, where he studied welfare policy, aging, and families. He was well known for his early leadership of the RAND Summer Institute, an annual workshop funded by the National Institute on Aging for social scientists who were newly interested in age. He also served as a senior economist at the Council of Economic Advisors under President Bill Clinton from 1998 to 1999. In 2001, Bob and his wife Gretchen returned to Ann Arbor. He returned to the University of Michigan, as did she, where he took on a leadership role for more than a decade in the panel study of income dynamics. Bob was a driving force in transforming that study into an interdisciplinary resource to study health over the life course and across generations. He was also a much admired director, as he took the time to personally connect with each staff member and regularly inquiring about their families and interests outside the office. As a colleague, Bob was keenly inquisitive, modest, and conscientious, and this made him a much sought after collaborator. His team scholarship contributed to early findings on the extent and nature of intergenerational family transfers. He also advanced policy discussions of the public safety net for families, and he raised awareness that social policy is an important vehicle for health policy. He also contributed to our understanding of population level changes in late life disability and was well regarded for his collegial leadership of the Trends Research Network on Old Age Disability. In the last 10 years, Bob's collaborative research returned to the theme of intergenerational ties and the role of the family in later life health and well-being. Bob also found working with early career researchers especially rewarding. A kind and generous mentor, he trained 40 or so graduate students and postdoctoral fellows from multiple fields, including economics, but also sociology, public policy, and public health. A symposium to honor Bob's love of mentorship is being held on May 12th at the Institute for Social Research, and the symposium will highlight the work of his mentees in 3 areas: inequality, health, and intergenerational transfers. Just say a few words about Bob's determination and grace in handling the physical limitations that accompany ALS. Throughout the 13 years that he lived with ALS, Bob truly seized each day, filling them with activities that he deeply valued. He relished his time with his wife Gretchen of 30 years, coaching his daughter's sports teams, participating in church and community activities, traveling widely, and wheeling around Ann Arbor to visit neighbors and friends. He inspired those neighbors and friends to come together to create a nonprofit organization called Ann Arbor Active Against ALS, which raises awareness and funds for ALS research. Bob not only remained engaged in his work throughout his life, but he continued to undertake new scholarly pursuits, even as the physical manifestations of his condition grew. In 2020, he taught himself to program Instata using eye gaze technology and went on to publish articles about behavioral responses and risks for severe disease during the COVID-19 pandemic. On a personal note, I will forever be grateful that Bob encouraged me to come to Michigan to join him at the Institute for Social Research. I learned so much from him, not just about work, but about life and grace and dignity and how to treat others. His insight, kindness, decency, and exuberance for life are sorely missed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Others who'd like to speak about Bob?
I'm Sarah Patterson. I was Bob's postdoc at Michigan. And I just want to follow up on what Vicki was saying about Bob's grace. I just want to share a story about when I started at Michigan, excuse me. I wanted to be taken really seriously. I was being mentored by Bob Shaney of all people. And I left work a little bit early. Bob lived in a neighboring neighborhood to me, and there's a Dairy Queen in between our neighborhoods, and I got off the bus and stopped at the Dairy Queen and was just like walking along and like drinking my milkshake, and like Bob came up on the sidewalk and I was like, oh God, you know, like I'm gonna not be seen as serious. I'm like drinking this milkshake, like having a day off here. But you know, Bob was like super happy to see me, and like we talked for a minute about work, but then we talked about ice cream for like the next 10 minutes, and Bob loved ice cream, and he just really instilled an importance of work-life balance and like living your life. And so I would just ask everyone the next time they have ice cream to maybe think about Bob. Thank you.
If I could, I want to say just one real quick thing. Naturally, we all focus, I think, on Bob's, illness and that period of his life where he really showed his true character. But that character was there in the beginning, and all those of us who knew him before, is just a wonderful guy, very considerate, just a wonderful human being. I didn't do research on his areas, but I just want to say he was an incredible leader of the PSAD during the period when he was the director. I've been a long time supporter and involved, and Bob asked me to join with him and apply for money for NSF for a project to improve the PSAD, in fact, to improve all the panels. And we had a big conference. I always got to remember, we had this conference about new questions and new panels, and it was in the basement of this hotel in Washington, D.C. over like 19th to 20th Street. And during the coffee break, somebody from the outside walked in and stole Bob's laptop. Just like walked in, and nobody noticed the guy. I guess he was dressed like a researcher or something. But we thought, like, what did he do? Did he know Bob was the director, the organizer? Got his laptop, but Bob, as usual, upset, but responded, with, a great kind of, okay, so it goes, but, and just handled it beautifully. But anyway, just a great loss, great human being, and great researcher.
Can I pick up, please? This Tim's meeting just after Robert. I was at that same meeting. ALS is an incredibly cruel disease. 13 years. That's way out on that tail, way out on the tail. And I knew Robert since Sheldon Danziger introduced him to me as a graduate student decades ago. And I wrote letters for him about Rand and about coming to Michigan. And we were good friends. We both worked in intergenerational transfers for a while and stuff like that. But I can't imagine anybody doing a better job dealing with what he had to deal with for so long. Just an amazing human being dealing with a deadly disease in the most lovely way. I couldn't do it, I don't think, but Bob Shane was just a wonderful man. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I add on to that as well? I wanted to add to what Robert was saying about the fact that Bob's personality. You know, Bob was ill for such a long time that a lot of people don't remember how he was. I met Bob when he was finishing his, or he had just finished his PhD, and I was a postdoc. And as Vicki said, he was one of the first organizers of what has become the Rand Summer Institute. The first year it was the Michigan Rand Summer Institute, and I worked with him. And some of you have heard stories about this because the first organizing meeting was the weekend of the Northridge quake in Los Angeles. And Al Hermelin and I were there and got sort of pushed out of our hotel because it had cracked apart. And we were sent to another hotel, and I was very nervous not being a Californian. So Bob and Gretchen took me in and let me sleep in their study, even though they were dealing with everything they had to deal with the quake, so that I would feel comfortable being in LA for another night with all the aftershocks and my lack of familiarity. And that was long, long before he knew he had ALS. That was how both he and Gretchen were their whole lives together. And so I agree that I think we want to remember so much of what Bob was like before he became ill, and that people, as we know from studying aging, people don't change. The hardships that they endure bring out what they are as people.
Thank you so much.
Hi, so I'm Coulter Mitchell. I'm at University of Michigan. Tonight's particularly poignant for me because I have had two mentors of some sort that we're memorializing. One is Sarah McClanahan, who I knew I couldn't get through talking about. Bob actually has a really unique tie to her. When I was a graduate student, my advisor heard that I was interested in incorporating genetics into social science research. I was Arlen Thornton, and he said, you should go talk to Bob Shaney about this. So I started talking to him. He was never my advisor. He was never an instructor. He just started meeting with me for days, hours, months. You know, it was a long time that we talked about it. And he said, oh, you should write this down. You should get this set up. That whole setup was perfectly timed because then when Sarah McClanahan came to visit, I could describe exactly what I wanted to do and ended up becoming her postdoc. The generosity that he shared in getting me ready for whatever opportunity, even though it didn't directly affect him, was incredible. And then the lovely thing is then he then recruited me back to Michigan later on. And incorporated me into some work with PSID too. So it was lovely, lovely human being.
Thank you so much. I was a postdoc at the University of Michigan in 2004 to 6 and had regular meetings with Bob too. And they were just so fun and energizing. And we were just discussing the PSID, and there was so much laughter and life. And I was just so tragic to hear that his life was cut so much shorter than it should have been. Any other comments? Okay, we will go on to William Stinner, who had been at the Utah State University and State of Utah Department of Health, and Dudley Poson will, from Texas A&M, will discuss William.
Okay, thank you. Bill Stinner was born in 1938 and died in 2021. He served in the Navy in the late 1950s and then began college in the early 60s, completing a BA at Columbia and then MA and PhD degrees at Penn State. In 1973, he began his long career at Utah State, after spending 2 years before that as a researcher at the University of the Philippines. Between 1973 until his retirement in 2000, he had a distinguished career at Utah State. He served for many years as the director of Utah State's Population Research Laboratory, where he served as the PI on several major projects funded by NIH. He was Utah State's College Researcher of the Year in 1979, and he served a term as Utah State's head of their sociology department. He brought a lot of national and international attention to the sociology and demography programs at Utah State. A lot of people don't realize that Bill also played a major role in the establishment of the population section known as Research Committee 41 of the International Sociological Association. He and Farhat Youssef from Australia founded RC41 in 1988, and Bill served as the president of RC41 from 1991 to 1994. Over his career, Bill played a central role in demographic and human ecological research. In many cases, he was the first to identify issues that subsequently became important lines of demographic inquiry. His groundbreaking research on parental preferences for sons or daughters, first published back in 1978, argued against strict son preferences policies that so many people were fostering, and he showed that many parents preferred a balance. Later research of his provided unique insights into community and population issues, and his later work on retirement migration also made important contributions. Bill and I were very good friends, and I'm greatly saddened by his death. He was born and raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I was born and raised in San Francisco. But other than that big difference, he and I were similar in so many respects. Although he was 2 years older than I, our birthdays are only 1 day apart at the end of November. He and I both completed several years tours of military service before we began our jobs as demographers, and we frequently talked about our experiences. His was in the Navy, mine was in the Army. He was a human ecologist, as I am. His first article, co-authored with his mentor, Gordon DeYoung at Penn State, was titled Southern Negro Migration, an Ecological Model, and it was published in the journal Demography in 1969. And he was the envy of all young demographers at the time and for lots of years thereafter. Also, Bill was a Roman Catholic, as am I. One time when I visited Utah State to give a talk, Bill and I had drinks one night at a bar in Logan, and joining us was the young priest who was the pastor of Bill's parish in Logan. How often do two demographers get together to have drinks and join up with a member of the local clergy? Probably not too frequently. Bill and I had a lot in common, and he was a very good friend. Bill married his wife, Carol McEwen, in 1961, and they shared life together for 56 years until Carol died in 2017. She studied geography at Penn State when Bill was studying demography there, but she was more active in Logan in local areas and issues, political issues. But what I remember Carol most for was her interest in humor and comedy and jokes and puns. She and Bill would sometimes attend conferences in the US and abroad, focusing on humor. Bill was renowned internationally and domestically for his numerous contributions to human ecology and demography. And very importantly, he was a wonderful human being, and I mourn his passing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dudley. Okay, we will go to James Valkel, who is at the University of Southern Denmark, and our speaker is Roland Rao from University of Rostock.
Remove my mask up front. So it's a bit easier to talk. It's difficult enough anyway. So James Vaupel, or simply Jim, as we all know him, was born on May 2nd, 1945 in Rochester, New York. He passed away on March 27th, 2022 in Odense, Denmark. Jim graduated with a BA in mathematical statistics, a Master of Public Policy, as well as a PhD, all from Harvard. Jim was the founding director of the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research, where I met him for the first time, and also John Wilmoth when I was still a master's student in 1999. More recently, he founded the Interdisciplinary Center on Population Dynamics at the University of Southern Denmark in Odense, and he was also still research professor at Duke University. Throughout his life, he was also at the University of Minnesota and IASA in Austria, to name just two of his many positions. Jim won the Irene Teuber Award of the PAA, so the Lifetime Achievement Award of the PAA in 2001, the Mindel-Sheps Award in 2008 for mathematical demography. He was a member of the National Academy of Sciences, fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and also member of the German Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina. He held honorary doctorates from the University of Lund in Sweden and Newcastle in the UK. Jim was one of the most influential demographers, currently with more than 48,000 citations and an age factor of 107. His most cited publications show partly the breadth of Jim's research. Mathematical and statistical demography, he called it the solid bedrock of demography, biodemography, but as well papers with a focus on public policy advice. But Jim was so much more to me, and I guess also to many of us. Jim was my Doktorvater, as we say in German, my mentor ever since. I'm also tempted to say a bit like a sensei in the martial arts, a role model and a teacher of his actual art, demography, but also for life. What do I mean? Sorry, just a few examples. Scientific rigor. Throughout my many cooperations and joint papers with Jim, there was always a #1 rule: scientific rigor. How often did Jim drop into my office or send me an email saying, we need to make sure that everything we're doing is really done correctly, and we should outline also all our assumptions we took. Jim cared about those tiniest details. He sometimes called me like at 8 in the morning German time, and he was in the US because he just remembered that we should change something to make it more clear. Jim cared about those tiniest details, but never forgot about the big picture, like what the research is about. The education of the next generation of demographers was dear to him. The European Doctoral School of Demography, a joint initiative of many European demography research units and university departments, was Jim's idea in the early 2000s. And he remained director of the school from its inception until now. And we had our last board meeting at the end of January, and he was full of enthusiasm, energy, ideas. I was very happy to see him, at full strength, just at the end of January. Building bridges, Jim built bridges. Jim was always inclusive. It really didn't matter whether you're from the so-called West, from Latin America, South Africa, Eastern Europe, Scandinavia, Russia, China, Japan, Australia. As long as you shared a part of his enthusiasm for demography, you were always welcome. Open science. Jim was an advocate of open science when the term barely existed. He initiated the journal Demographic Research in 1998-99 and helped to develop it into a top journal. I think it was the first demographic journal without a subscription fee and without a submission fee, so offering access to knowledge for everyone in the world. Informing policymakers, for instance, by starting the network Population Europe about 10 years ago. And I could go on and on and on, but please let me conclude with an image Jim always liked very much: Aristotle's fire as a symbol for life, and the fire of demography, which burns in many of us, in all of us, I guess, here. To keep this fire burning, one needs fuel like wood or oxygen. Jim was living and breathing demography like nobody else I ever met. So he provided oxygen to the fire of demography. With his passing, the fire of demography burns less brightly. So let's honor Jim and his legacy, and let's make it our mission to keep the fire of demography burning brightly. Jim, I miss you, and I will miss you in the future forever, I guess, as so many of us. Thank you, Jim, for your mentorship, for your never-ending curiosity, for your sense of humor, for the fun we had, like at the workshop in Taormina, Italy, Sicily in 2008, for everything. For those of you who want to express their grief and their thankfulness, you can find I think it's called a condolence book at the booth of the Max Planck Institute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roland. Others who would like to comment?
I'm Agnieszka Wojnowniczak from Warsaw School of Economics. As all of you were also deeply shocked by the sad news about Jim. He was an outstanding demographer and a remarkable person whose visionary ideas how to progress in research and scientific collaboration have had a fundamental impact on demography, especially in Europe. Directly or indirectly, he also influenced research and professional choices of demographers in Warsaw School of Economics and in Poland. We collaborated with him at the Max Planck Institute of Demographic Research in the European Doctoral School of Demography that was established together with Professor Nina Jóźwiak, who also passed away 6 years ago, and we deeply miss her as well. We were privileged to work with him also when hosting the EDSD in Warsaw. We are grateful for the privilege to meet him personally, and outstanding scientist, a great teacher, and an open and friendly person, bestowing particularly kind attention to young demographers who were inspired by his new thoughts and explorations. We will remember his youthful enthusiasm for innovative ideas, how to develop research on population and strengthen interdisciplinary cooperation, as well as his contribution to create supportive institutional arrangements for young scholars in Europe and indeed in Eastern Europe as well. We will try to pass what we have learned from him in our research, teaching, and relevant efforts to strengthen the European research community. And these are words not only from myself, but also Professor Irena Kotowska and Anita Abramowska-Gmont from Warsaw. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, I can't see if anybody wants to talk in the room, but I just wanted to add that I was deeply shocked. I met Jim when I was a graduate student at Duke, and his enthusiasm for everything in demography and research was astonishing. And he could bring that sort of bubbling excitement to things that others would find dull and arcane and really bring you along. And he conveyed that enthusiasm and came up with new ideas every time I saw him. It was just, his was just such a fertile mind that it was shocking and sad to lose him when he was as much at a peak as any time in his career. So he is very much missed.
Thank you.
Can I turn this around? I feel like I don't want to have my back to the people I'm speaking to mostly. So I don't know if there's a camera now that they, I don't know how it's working, but anyway, I had to speak about Jim. Oh, there's a camera. Okay, very good. Jim was enormously influential in the field. And I've written something actually that I hope to publish somewhere about him, about the history of how I knew him and how much he influenced me and how much I think he's influenced the field. But I'm not going to read that to you. I just have it here in front of me as some notes. I've kind of highlighted a few things, so I'll remember what I wanted to say. But I first met Jim in 1985. He was at YASA at that point in Vienna. And I went there with a group of young demographers as part of a summer program, the summer program in population. And that summer, that program was co-led by Jim Voepel and Anatoly Yashin. And I don't think that went on for too many years. I think Jim wasn't at YASA for that long. But it was a special moment for me. And I think it's also really a special moment historically. You have to remember 1985 was still the Cold War. And the fact that Voepel and Yashin started working there at YASA at that point, it really laid the foundation for a lot of things. For me, it laid the foundation for a whole series of Russian collaborators that I worked with who have been very important for me and for the HMD project. And I think for Europe, others have mentioned, I mean, it really led to eventually a European school of demography. And, you know, this is really, it's just fundamental for the field in terms of what he contributed institutionally that way. But it was also in the summer of 1985 that I began to work with these large arrays of mortality data organized by age, sex, and time. Jim shared with me such data sets that he had acquired for Italy, from Graziella Caselli, and from France, from Jacques Vallin, and from Sweden from Hans Lundström. And you know, these became the data sets that I worked with early in my career and that I came to share with other people through the Human Mortality Database. And, you know, this year we're celebrating the 20-year anniversary of the HMD, actually. And I have to say, really, you know, it's 20 years formally, but in many ways, the seed was planted back in 1985 when Jim first shared that kind of data with me and I started working with it. I was really, his generosity to me as a young researcher was just absolutely formative. His sense of others, his openness, open research, open data, sharing data resources, it inspired me to build data resources and share them broadly, because I thought that would, you know, we've seen it promotes research by doing that, sharing what you have. And Jim really set the example for me that way. But Jim, I was also in that summer of 1985. I'm still in 1985, so this may take a while. But it was also in that summer of 1985 that Jim first introduced me to the methodological challenges of the age period cohort identification problem, which became really the central topic of my PhD dissertation. So very influential in my career, and I think in the field. Jim was, as we all know, very much interested in extreme longevity, super longevity, and the oldest old, those above 80, centenarians and super centenarians, those above 110. And he, well, it was through him that and his Danish colleagues that I learned about Christian Mortensen, who was a man at that time, when I met him, 112 years old, living in San Rafael, California, and I started going to visit him every month. And with our Danish colleagues, documented, he had immigrated from Denmark to the US in 1903. And working on both sides of the Atlantic, digging up documents, we really confirmed that he was really that old. At the time, he was the oldest living male human. And he held the record for quite a while, for a few years, but eventually surpassed by a Japanese gentleman. But there were several, you know, cases like this that Jim and his colleagues were involved in working on, and he helped to establish databases on supercentenarians and was really very influential. But he also had a lot of fun with it. He would come back from, you know, a meeting or some encounter with some supercentenarian. It doesn't have to be 110 years old, but even, you know, high 90s. He would take an interest if they were in their high 90s. And he would come back with some pearl of wisdom from this person about what it was that accounted for their exceptional longevity. And some of them, frankly, were just rather implausible, and some of them probably just exactly backwards. But, you know, it's been too long. I didn't write them down. I can't give you an inventory. But one that I very clearly remember, because he would kind of point to the sky and tell you what this person had told us about how to live a super long life. And one that I remember, don't eat tomatoes, you know, and this was not atypical, you know, I mean, it was this kind of crazy advice that he would gather. I don't know if anybody wrote them down. We should have probably at the time. But the last thing I want to mention is that, you know, another reason that Jim was so important and so influential in my career was that he had this commitment to public policy. He was, you know, interested in the mathematics, and, you know, you saw him at these meetings, you know, working through formulas and so forth. But he, you know, he'd been trained at Harvard, and he graduated from the Kennedy School. And when he was at Minnesota, it was in the Hubert Humphrey School of Policy, and at Duke, at least his later appointment at Duke, was through the Sanford School of Public Policy. So, you know, he was committed to that. And, you know, I took kind of a right turn in my career at some point and decided to leave academia and, you know, stay at the UN for the last almost 10 years now. But, you know, I always wondered how that was seen. Some of my senior colleagues, did they think that was the right thing to do and so forth. But you know, I think I always had Jim's example in mind, that you could combine, you could go from the mathematics of populations to, you know, public policy, and that the field can span that, and people can span that space. And the last interaction I had with Jim actually was in November of last year. We both participated in a memorial service for the eminent Russian demographer Anatoly Vishnevsky. We were both invited speakers for that, something that organized by Vladimir Shkolnikov and others. But Jim spoke about a very technical topic. It was doing formulas, and it was actually very closely related to something that I had done years ago. And I spoke about a new report that we've now published at the United Nations on global population growth and sustainable development. And yes, I will use this memorial as just to make a plug for our latest report. But, and I'd encourage you to look it up because, you know, it was really an attempt to take on big questions, big fundamental classic questions in the field. And, you know, after the memorial for Wisniewski, I wrote to Jim and I had a comment on his paper and I, you know, pointed out things I had done earlier and the connections and so forth. And he wrote back to me, thanking me for that, but also saying just some words that, you know, for me will be very, very important, that the kind of encouragement, I mean, basically, I mean, if I ever had any doubts about whether it was the right choice and whether, you know, whether I was making a contribution, he really picked up on the presentation and how important it was and congratulated me for it and said he was very happy the population division was going in that direction. And those were that was my final contact with him. So it'll be a great memory. So I, like Roland, I just want to thank Jim Voepel for all he gave to me and to the world. For me, he gave me wings and he made sure that I learned how to fly, you know, and that's important. And for the field also, I think he's kind of given us wings and many good things can still come from the things that he created. So we won't forget him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other comments?
Hello, everyone. I'm Cosmo Strozza. I'm a postdoc at the Interdisciplinary Center on Population Dynamics at the University of Southern Denmark. Jim was my PhD supervisor and postdoc supervisor now. Well, of course, there are no words to say how grateful I am to him and the whole young demographers community, to him for establishing the European Doctoral School of Demography, not only for the training that this provides to all of us, but also for the whole community that he created with this idea just about 20 years ago. He was one of the most enthusiastic person I've ever met, it was already said before, but his enthusiasm was contagious. So you could feel when he was in the office, walking around in the corridors. And one of the last memories I have, at least of him a few weeks ago, was when he finally submitted yet another paper of his innumerous ones. And he came to me before leaving, he said, "Cosmo, I'm happy." And then he left to go play with his grandchildren for the weekend, you know, a lot of stories about it. So that's what I like to remember of him and his energy. And yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm also a postdoc at the University of Southern Denmark. A lot of people have already talked about his enthusiasm, Jim's enthusiasm and his passion. So I'm gonna skip that little bit that I wrote about that. He wanted us to have a close bond. He wanted his team to be close-knit. And so I'm just gonna share a couple anecdotes. He loved coming to the office and spending time with the team. And at our Christmas party this past Christmas, this past December, he brought his homemade walnut schnapps made from walnuts that have been harvested on the 8th day of the 8th month and stored for a number of years in a glass bottle shaped like a former Danish prime minister, and that we thought looked like Lenin. And he made a rule. Every time he yelled, "Skål," everyone would have to lift their elbow and down their schnapps. And then we'd refill, continue eating and chatting, and wait for the next skål. When he passed away, just last week, we asked his wife if we could send flowers. And I think it's very telling that she told us, no flowers, go out to dinner, get a nice bottle of wine and good food with people you care about. And that's what Jim would have wanted.
Thank you. Other last comments? Okay, last we have Edward Wrigley, who was at the Cambridge Group for the History of Population and Social Structure, and our speaker is George Alter from University of Michigan.
Edward Anthony Wrigley was a demographer, historian, and geographer whose work shaped the historical study of population in the Industrial Revolution. He held faculty positions at the London School of Economics, Oxford, and Cambridge. Among many honors and positions, he was president of the British Society for Population Studies, fellow and president of the British Academy, laureate of the International Union for the Scientific Study of Population, and member of both the American Philosophical Society and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. In 1996, he was appointed Knight Bachelor by Queen Elizabeth for services to historical demography. Tony Wrigley, as he was always known, began and ended his career at Cambridge University. His PhD dissertation described industrial development and demographic growth in the Austrasia coal fields stretching across France and Germany. It emphasized regional analysis and the transition to fossil fuels, which were recurrent themes in his later work. In the 1960s, Wrigley published the first demographic study of an English parish following Louis Henry's standard for family reconstitution, as well as a fascinating study of London's role in the demography of pre-industrial England. His 1969 publication of Population and History provided an updated version of the Malthusian model, integrating the latest work in anthropology, sociology, statistics, economics, history, and geography. In 1964, Wrigley and Peter Laslett co-founded the Cambridge Group for the History of Population and Social Structure, which revolutionized historical studies of the family and demography. In addition to attracting scholars from around the world, Wrigley and Laslett activated an army of volunteer local historians who gathered data from parish registers. These data were the foundation of two landmark volumes, The Population History of England 1541 to 1871, and English Population History from Family Reconstitution, co-authored with Roger Schofield, Jim Erpin, and Ross Davies. The Population History of England provided annual estimates of total population, mortality, and fertility over 3 centuries, based on back projection and extension of Ron Lee's inverse projection. Both volumes argued that rising fertility rather than falling mortality was responsible for rapid demographic growth in the century after 1750. Changes in fertility were due to Malthus's preventive check, which was driven by shifts in the age and incidence of marriage. This implied that England avoided the worst effects of runaway population growth on per capita income and established a standard of living well above bare subsistence. In the last decades of his long career, Wrigley returned to his focus to the role played by energy sources in the transition from an organic economy based on agriculture to an inorganic economy based on fossil fuels. While he remained convinced that coal played a necessary role enabling the growth of living standards and economic opportunities, he became pessimistic about the long-run prospects of the planet and the devastating potential of modern warfare. For all his accomplishments, award, and recognition, Tony Wrigley remained an unassuming and gracious figure. He delighted in free-flowing conversations at morning coffee with students and faculty at the Cambridge Group. Generations of young scholars benefited from his gentle questions and generous advice. As a reviewer once commented, Tony Wrigley will be remembered for his considerable contribution to answering the central question of historical sociology. What is the distinctive nature of the modern world and how did it come about?
Thank you so much, George. And others like to speak? Any other final comments? I'd like to thank you all so much for being here. This has been such a nice evening, remembering all our departed colleagues, and hope you have a good rest of your conference, and see you again soon.